pull it back up here again. Second.
There we are. And we're live. Welcome to another live stream with Intelligent Construction Opportunities. Intelligent Construction Opportunities does these live streams so we can provide the construction vendors an opportunity to share their industry experience and the value that they're offering from their technologies for construction professionals. I'm Steph Brown, and I am the founder of Intelligent Construction Opportunities. And today, I want to welcome back Chad Waite from Document Crunch. Great to see
Hello.
you.
Yeah, you too, Steph. We were just getting into the conversation before we started this live stream, talking about kind of change of seasons and weather, and I wanted to pull something up really quick. We were talking about getting maybe a little personal on these type of live streams, and so we were talking about hobbies and activities. And one thing I just wanted to share really quickly was what we have to look forward to where I'm located in Utah. So beautiful backcountry biking here on the snow. It's kind of fun when you actually start to get some of the white stuff on the ground and get rid of the really hot summer temperatures. But
beautiful.
Yeah, it's really a great place to be if you like the outdoors. But just a little taste of what the Utah lifestyle can get if you like the outside. Great to be back too. Thank you for setting all this up. I'm really looking forward to the call, and hopefully the listeners and tuners, people who are tuning into this live stream are as well.
Absolutely. So we have something really cool to share with people today. The good folks at Document Crunch and in the marketing department, I guess, have really devised, I think, a really great treasure to be able to explain how Document Crunch does what they do and why they do it. So, Chad, do you want to talk a little bit about the Crunch blueprint and how we're going to, sort of strip and rip what's really happening behind the scenes?
Yeah, sure. No, it'd be my pleasure. Maybe I'll start first by just talking from a little bit of a high level on, why an ebook, maybe even kind of what Document Crunch is and does to set the tenor of this. Because look, anybody who's listening to this has probably seen a million ebooks and a million white papers and a million case studies, and it can be noise sometimes, right? There's a lot of things that are out there trying to grab your attention and get you to put in the effort to understand it better. And this is admittedly another one of those items, right? Like, we are trying to bring some sort of educational piece to the forefront, but this is a little bit special because of two reasons. First, everything in here is relatively net new, right? Like, what we're about to be talking about, at least for the construction space, is new horizons. It is not something that's a known quantity for most builders, unless you're already deeply involved with Document Crunch. The second thing, though, is that I want to really use this time to demystify what artificial intelligence is. Artificial intelligence, and Steph, I'm completely positive that you can validate this as well.
Go for it.
It's the buzzword of the year, right? Everybody's talking about AI, even though they don't really know what it means. And to some degree, I think that if we look at things like Microsoft Copilot or ChatGPT, when you look at AI through the lens of those systems, it can be really difficult to kind of understand what can AI do for me as a business in the construction space, right? Because
well, let's talk a little bit about, you just came back from a trade show, you told me. Give them, share with our audience what that was like.
Yeah, I was in San Diego for the NECA annual convention, so the National Electrical Contractors Association, last week. It was a great show, and it's really interesting that there was a lot of feedback where people, would come up. We had a booth there as Document Crunch, and they would say, "Well, I don't know what AI does. Like, I look at like ChatGPT and it can do anything for anyone at any time in all situations." And that may sound great, but it also doesn't really give you any direction on like, what does that actually mean for my business? And so the opposite is really true here, right? For Document Crunch, we don't solve anything for everyone at every time in every situation. What we are meant to do, and what our AI helps augment, is risk analysis. and project compliance with the contracts that you were signing as a business, right? These are monotonous, human-driven tasks that we are now applying AI to understand a lot better. So instead of being this nebulous, ethereal thing that is really difficult for people to kind of understand how they deploy AI to the business, even though it's the hot topic, I mean, I can sum up what Document Crunch does in 4 words, right? I mean, simply put, it's contract in, risk out. And I think maybe that's one thing to set the tone of this conversation, is that anytime you're looking at an AI product, especially in the construction technology space, and Steph, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, but like, you shouldn't be looking at doing this just for sake of having kind of the latest and greatest, but like, if you want to validate what a AI product can do, lead with the problem, right? Define your problem and say, hey, we need to solve complexity around analyzing contracts, or maybe certain BIM design, or whatever it may be, right? Like, start with your friction point and then go to the actual, searching of solutions to address that, rather than going to AI and saying, what can AI do for me, right? Is a general question.
Well, can I just interrupt you for a second, Chad? That's why Intelligent Construction Opportunities tries to again and again talk about any kind of software or construction technology as a digital tool. If we only think of it in the same way of those hand tools that are in the average skilled trades tool belt, we know that it is the right tool for the right problem. You need to hammer a nail. You're not going to grab, well, generally speaking, you're not going to grab your level. So, at the end of the day, that's how contextually we want to understand what these tools are. This is why Document Crunch is a great example to me of really having zeroed in on one part of the problem as it relates to the specific roles in the field that then connect with the back office and vice versa.
That's interesting too. I think there's an element of interconnectivity there that needs to be addressed, and frankly, it's part of the reason why we have this ebook, right? So to back up just a little bit, then, deploying a specific AI-driven solution like Document Crunch to your business, even though the desired outcome is known, and that this can be a solution to achieve that outcome, something like this ebook is helpful in breaking it down from like a deployment standpoint, right? Like, okay, that you need Document Crunch to help get your risk analysis and your contracts and your project compliance done to a better degree than you're doing it now, but there's still a lot that you have to do in order to achieve that. So this is why we put together this ebook. And one thing I want to do here is I want to set the expectation that we're going to be looking at this from a very high level, right? In fact, Steph, if you go to the next page on this, we're going to spend a lot of time looking at this graphic and kind of talking through some of the steps. But to anybody who's on this call, please reach out to Steph via LinkedIn after, and she can actually get you a copy of this ebook, because some of the granularities in here, a lot of the examples, a lot of the things that we go to illustrate some of the broader things that we're going to be talking about, it's helpful to know. And I promise that it is going to be worthwhile. Again, we know that there's a lot of things begging for your attention, from ebooks and sales calls and white papers and all of that. This one really is an interesting glimpse into a future state of what the industry holds when it comes to artificial intelligence, right? It's almost less about exactly how Document Crunch helps, which it's very, very oriented around that, but it's a good glimpse at how AI can assist in very human-driven operations. So let's jump into things. Steph, anything to add before we go into this compliance?
Yes, I just want to quote something you said. You said that we often hear that content is king, but as you shared your expression, but context is queen. And this is why this ebook is a really great takeaway for all registrants and any other people out there that may come upon this live stream post airing today, which we hope you will, because there will be some edited videos that will come out, etc. But it's an opportunity for you to really understand, you know, what this is about. When Chad was at that trade show, I mean, you know, again, AI is a big fat buzzword that can mean so many things to so many people. And there are some people that can effectively go into a tool like ChatGPT, which is only one of many, by the way, and get some valid answers. But it's how do you keep all the context moving together in the particular role and job and reasons that you're even employing these kinds of tools. That's what's going to become more and more and more important. And also caution that the smarter these tools become, you do have to be really careful and wary of what you're sharing with these tools.
Yes. For the love of everything, please do not upload your confidential contracts into ChatGPT. That becomes public domain, and you know, we know a handful of builders who have done just that with good intentions, but maybe not realizing the outcome. So I would echo that. You know, do your due diligence on any tool that you are going to use. The other thing I'd say too is again, really define the problems, right? Like if you are looking at any tools, whether it's Document Cruncher, you know, any one of many context solutions that are out there, the best way you can find value is to lead with the problem that you're looking to solve. And
but I want to back up a little bit though, because you really hit on something to me that I don't think is clear enough, right? If you're going to use a public tool like ChatGPT, and you do put your private information in there, the whole reason they are giving you this tool for free or near free is because of exactly that. They will take away your information and use it for themselves without any, you know, penalty, obviously. So it's very important that you understand that you don't do this and why you want to engage potentially a platform like Document Crunch. So do you want to expound on that, Chad?
Well, I would just say really quickly that there's a general saying, you know, if the product is free, you are generally the product, right? So, you know, even going back to like Facebook back in the day, oh, this is great, it's free, you don't have to pay for it, but you know, you're a cog in an advertising wheel. And so to your point, something like ChatGPT, it is free and open because if you are plugging into the system, they are learning off of your behavior and your information and your interactions. So just treat those tools with a high degree of careful interactions when you are dealing with things like confidential information like a contract. Now, Document Crunch, on the other hand, of course, this is something that is heavily leveraged and built around the construction space. It is not public domain, and you know, we lead with the question of why Document Crunch. What is it looking to solve? So I keep talking about some key terms here: risk analysis and contract compliance, and you can of course see that on this wheel that we'll get into here in a minute. But I think it's really important to maybe set the stage with what it is we're trying to accomplish here. And really it revolves around the complexity and risk that contracts carry in the construction space. It's funny, general contractors, subcontractors, what's the unifying word there? You have the word contract in it. It is central to what this industry does. And for better or for worse, typically those documents are written though by attorneys for other attorneys. They are covering a lot of bases in rich, deep legalese that is often hard to interpret or understand. And more importantly, there's a lot of information in these contracts that not only your back office needs to understand, but you need to then democratize that information to project teams, right? And I think that's something that gets lost in translation a little bit, is the full life cycle of something like a contract that impacts all the, from the very beginning of consideration to bidding to, getting in the trenches on if this is something we're going to actually, move forward on or not, all the way to project closeout. Contracts impact every single piece of that. And if you step back and you look at the amount of confusion that they can create because of who they're written by and who they're for, there's a big gap that needs to be filled there to do two things: to understand it better and to also allow for more compliance. So when you are executing your project, things don't go sideways. So
let's I want to get into this a little bit, Chad, so that we're not, sort of we're cognizant of making sure that people are walking away with, I'll say, maybe the basic elements of any contract. So we're talking, you're going to contextualize scope of work, perhaps the contract price is something that you want to be thinking about. Is that fair?
Well, yeah, I would argue that it's, in Document Crunch itself, actually, let's go into the wheel here. I think this is interesting. So,
all right.
Let's go down to the first step. Okay, so if you can go to page 4 of this, the first piece of that wheel was risk assessment. There you go.
Yeah.
And risk assessment encompasses everything that you just said, Steph, and a lot more. So basic items that you need to understand how they are treated. This could be anything from, how indemnification is treated, to insurance requirements, to contingency, to material price escalations, to changes in the work. Anything that is carrying importance to your proper understanding and execution, we will go through and look for. So the idea here is that typically most of our attendees, I'm sure, would agree, they get a new contract that they want to bid on. What do? They have a CFO, maybe an attorney, maybe a project manager, look through that contract to get an understanding of what the heck's even in there, right? Like, what does this language tell us? Now, this is, if you back up from an AI perspective, an extraordinarily monotonous task that is not actually very well suited to be done by humans because of several things. First off, contracts are huge, right? Like, they're usually hundreds of pages long. They've got a lot of complex parts. And one thing that we see often is that you could have swaths of areas that are talking about certain things that are, important to understand. This is how contingency is handled. And then maybe one little sentence buried down here at the very beginning, a little if-then statement that nullifies all of it in a very specific way. And if you miss that in a human review, which it's very easy to do, well, guess what? If something goes sideways in the project and you didn't know about that, that's a really bad time to have it surface and start to understand it then. So our AI will go through and review the entirety of the document and benchmark it against roughly 50 provisions that we know builders need to be aware of when it comes to analyzing the risk, right? This is
so I just want to stop you for a second. I want to paint a visual for our viewers. Please. So we are looking at some kind of a shell. I'm going to, where it's maybe got a query box, and you are putting in, for example, the word compliance. You tell me, give me an example of what do you think a project manager in this instance might put in that query box to drive what you just described, I would think is going to be the output.
Yeah, that's a great question. In fact, what I would say is let's go to the next page on this. And it's a little hard to see because you're not looking at the full blown screen of this ebook, which is, again, everybody who's listening, I would highly encourage you to go to Steph after this and get a copy of this ebook. But what it is when you're reviewing this, we will actually pull out certain areas of things like, let's talk about change orders, right? Changes in the work. I mean, it happens inevitably on every project. You want to understand how it handles it. So we actually will highlight where each and every occurrence of language in the contract is. You can kind of see it highlighted there on the right-hand side of that screenshot, very small on your screen, of course. But the idea is that we not only point it out in the contract, but here's the deal. We will use generative AI to go through and summarize all of the occurrences of that language in the contract. And I want to be very clear on what this means. Let's say There's a scenario where you have multiple stakeholders that are involved in vetting the risk for a contract. You have a contract manager, you have a CFO, you have an attorney. Okay. That is three disciplines coming in, trying to extract the similar understanding from a contract that can lead to very different outcomes. So our system will do this. It will go through and analyze what in the contract needs to be understood to help you understand how changes in the work are handled. But then it will summarize everything that it's found in a very, very concise but thorough summary of what does that language around change orders mean, and here's what it actually impacts for you as the builder. And what happens is if you have those three people on your back office, again, the project manager, a CFO, and an attorney who are all looking at the same thing now, the same summary of exactly how that's handled, there's a benchmarked understanding, there's a parity and understanding for everything that the contract's saying around how you handle change orders, right? And what that does is it cuts down on the confusion. You can have as many people as you need to be making a decision on this, but they're all seeing the same things. And we do that for over 50 different critical areas of understanding the risk in a contract. And that is massive because it also takes our system 5 minutes to do that, right? Where typically it takes, somebody on the human end of it, depending on the length and complexity of the contract, 5 hours, maybe 50 hours, right? It is massively efficient and provides better benchmarking areas for understanding of exactly what you need to realize is in the contract.
And if you, you'll see at the end of our live stream today, but we, definitely, we're happy to give a custom demo where we, pre-interview and we actually find out, okay, what is your job role? What are the kind of legalities and liabilities that concern your job role, and give you a document crunch demonstration accordingly. And
I think that's one big thing. I think that's really interesting is a lot of times you'll see this like really refined demo that's been polished and stuff. If you have a really awful contract that you're working through right now, or one that was particularly problematic in the past, let us show you what document crunch does on that document, right? It's not this prepared, refined demo. It's your paper, your friction. We can go through and say, look at what we've been able to find in here. We'll actually give you the output too. So if you are doing some sort of, risk analysis on a really, really problematic document, let's help on a demo. We're happy to do it.
That's great. I love the word. The word of the day is friction, Chad.
It really is, though, because that is what it is. Now, you pulled up this next step in perfect timing, Steph. I promise this wasn't coordinated at all. So that was really good segue into negotiation, because what we want to do, again, this is very back office focus here, is once you get that risk assessment done and you understand what's in the contract, this enables you to be in a place where you can negotiate a lot more effectively to get terms that are equitable to all parties. Now, I realize that this is maybe more on the GC front and not on the subcon front. Subcon can be a lot more take it or leave it, which is why the risk analysis side is almost even more important for them, right? What are they going to be saying yes to, even if they can't necessarily alter the things that do carry potential pitfalls for their operations. For the negotiation, though, two things happen. We've not only highlighted the risk, but we give you insights into why that risk is important. Like, what are these 50 items that we've been able to surface information around it? Why is it that you want to care about having equitable terms to you? But then we also give you what is as close to kind of industry standard language that is fair to both parties as possible. And we currently base that off of consensus doc language. So it gives you a lot of really good insight into how to negotiate from a baseline and where you should really be going. Now, the caveat to this is it is not legal advice, right? We are not saying, here's exactly what you should say. We're saying, look, this is typically what we see as an equitable outcome for anybody who's trying to get to a place that's fair and balanced. And I would be very careful. This is one thing I want to say. I would be very careful to anybody listening. Any AI system that says that they're giving you legal advice, which I'm sure there's not many and they want to avoid that, that bee's nest, and any AI system that is telling you to take the human decision out of the process, you should be very wary of. Okay. Document crunch, I think I used the word augment before, and that is, we're augmenting the monotonous part of reviewing a contract. We're augmenting the ability to negotiate faster and more effectively. We are not replacing the human need to drive those two things, nor should you ever be looking at a tech solution that does that when there are things as critical as contract items on the table. So just a word of caution to everybody, things to look out for: do not ever have an AI replace the ability to make human-driven decisions. It can help, it can augment, it can make it so it's a lot faster and more comprehensive, but it should never, ever completely replace the human-driven decision-making process.
And it certainly helps you align, right? It helps you align to the actual, as you say, you gave, an example of the triad of the CFO and the legal team and the project manager. You could have anybody in that triad, but what you're trying to do is be aligned on the interpretation of these contracts and what they mean to which role in what application.
Yes, exactly. And the last thing I'll say on that too is, in the negotiation side, when there are a lot of different roles that need to sign off on getting this contract to a place where it should be, we have something called our review checklists. So it is not only taking the important provisions that are in there, but it's also putting them in a way that is materially high impact to the builder, right? So if you have, for example, role-based, reviews, so you need to know that your CFO has reviewed, contingency and indemnification and insurance, and we know that the project manager needs to know, X, Y, and Z, and that our attorney needs to know this and this and this. You can start to build out these checklists where you have a very clear track record of saying, yes, we are okay with the way changes in the work is handled, but we need to go back and negotiate how indemnification is spelled out here. And we're okay with the way that this is handled, but we're going to have to say outright no to the way this is, right? And so you get this very, very clear path to approval and bidding that you wouldn't get otherwise. It's a lot of yes or no or maybe or thoughts and opinions in people's heads, but now you're able to bring all of the insights that you have through an AI system down to a place where there's a very clear line of sight on where you stand with the risk inside of document crunch. It is, I can't even tell you, it is a phenomenal way to handle risk analysis and negotiation. But I would argue that the more exciting part isn't even step 2. I would say that it's the next 3 steps. So project team education and step 4.
Fantastic. So let's go to project team education. And also I want to give a sort of a shout out to anyone who's listening. If you have any questions of us here, we're happy to answer them for you. Or if you want to share some of your own experiences with, your frustration with contracts or things that you are curious about whether document crunch could overcome them. I've got one that just came to my own head, and that was, if you threw any kind of term in to document crunch just because maybe you didn't understand it, does it turn around and just throw you out a fairly general but equal definition?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, yes and no. It really depends on what you're trying to get out of it, right? I think if you were to say, give me language that is more equitable to me, enter, it's not going to do that because, again, we're not advising on exactly what your outcome should be per your desires and where your company needs to stand. We will show you, again, what industry standard is. So that's why we go to consensus docs, right? Is we'll say, look, if you're curious about how, say, hazardous material handling is treated in this, what is an industry standard that is approved and approached by kind of a well-known organization that's entire job is to give these type of standards? Consensus docs is a really good place for this. Now, what our system can do, and that's actually a really great question, because when you talk about these needs to understand certain aspects that are very bespoke and unique to a situation that may be right then in the moment unfolding, maybe you're on the project site, the ability to get those insights on demand is huge, right? And it could be anything from, generalized questions for like, how do we handle this? Or it could be something very, very granular, like, hey, I need to build out a weather delay notification because I'm in Florida right now. And, Florida's obviously in a very, very terrible weather event. So we're going to have to delay construction. You can get very specific with the output, which I want to talk about in just a moment. Before we get there, though, this third step is probably, and I would argue, the single most important aspect of Document Crunch. People know Document Crunch as the risk analysis platform. But beyond the back office, that risk analysis doesn't mean jack to the people who are responsible for executing the project, right? An attorney's understanding of what is in these complex documents does not magically get distilled down to a project manager who is now responsible for the compliance of that contract that they're legally bound to. And I think that's one of the biggest risk factors in all of construction, is the fact that you now have project managers who are given these complex documents, and I kid you not, the instructions are read the freaking contract, and then you cross your fingers and hope and pray that they do, to the degree that nothing's going to go sideways. And I think you would be hard pressed to find a company that can honestly say, we have had a project manager go through this contract to the level of detail that makes us feel completely confident that everything is going to be covered, right? Like, it just doesn't happen because people are pressed for times. Contracts are complicated to understand. There's a million things that are going to be grabbing attention. So how do we mitigate this? How do we use something like AI to bring that parity and understanding that the back office had to the field teams and ensure that there is compliance around the project? And that is exactly what step 3 is all about. Use our generative AI to go through these contracts and to say, hey, we're going to put together what we call our playbook, our project playbook, that gives very clear-cut instructions on how to execute on the things that are most important to staying contract compliant with this project. So let's go back to change orders, right? How do we handle change orders? How do we, use our contingency appropriately? Where do we, when and where and why do we give notices? How are those handled? It essentially creates, for anybody who used Cliff Notes or Spark Notes in college, think of this project playbook driven by AI as Cliff Notes to understand not only how you stay compliant, but how to do it in an executable fashion. And it's amazing, right? It takes 2 or 3 minutes. Throw out that whole hope and pray thing, right? We're never ever going to go on a hope and a prayer that our project team does this again. We find, Steph, that almost every one of our clients who use Document Crunch and they use the project playbook side are requiring that their project teams now launch with a project playbook before anything happens, right? Because what the project manager could do is say, look, everybody, super complex 500-page contract here. Or I can give you a 5 or 6 page overview document that tells you every single thing you need to know about how to handle this properly. And you can take that with you on the field. You can access it from your computer. We can print out a PDF. You have that at your fingertips at any given time. And guess what? You're not going to have to go to the back office for things. You're not going to have to play that time delaying game of telephone that goes back to the attorney, and then they have to look into the contract and, oh, it was something really basic, but now they have to get back to you, and 2 or 3 hours have been wasted in the best case scenario. You have that project team education from the get-go. And that parity and understanding and distillation of knowledge from what's in the contract into easy to understand terms for a project team is, I would argue, one of the most transformative moments in construction, right? It is huge. It is huge being able to give clear-cut instructions and not have the friction, going back to the key buzzword of the day, associated with it.
So here I have a question for you then. Okay, so it sounds to me like this is a no-brainer, as we all know, and our audience, construction professionals, know better than us because they're in it every day, working through problems minute by minute, so on and so forth. All we're trying to do here with Document Crunch is give you a more simplified way to take all those details, to put them into your own playbook, and to work it into your project process. So, who is the first most likely role that when they were to get their hands on Document Crunch would generate this kind of document?
Project managers. First off, I think that was a really eloquent way of summing that all up. What took me about 10 minutes to explain, you did in about 15 seconds. So very well done. I would say project managers are usually the first ones who are in this because they need to have the holistic understanding of everything that is touching the project for proper execution, right? But then a lot of times you'll see project managers then taking that understanding that they're trying to curate on their own and making their own, guides or overviews or one pagers or something that are, it's a great effort, but it is usually not as comprehensive as I think they want it to be. And half the time they're not even understanding a lot of what is in that legal language as well. So, their own distillation of that, their own, arriving at a conclusion for how the legal language is handling things, and then them trying to make it available to their team. I
just want to stop you right there because this is something that they might instinctually, some project managers, feed right into some tool like ChatGPT. The difference is they're taking their private documents, putting them in a private environment like Document Crunch, and getting the results that are even more refined because how the shell has been built in Document Crunch is to really hone in on the legal aspects.
Yes, this goes back to what I was saying at the beginning. Document Crunch, to use just a horrible analogy, we are not the all-season tires of AI, right? I mean, we are very, very focused in. We are snow tires for the snow season, right? We have been built around an understanding of the AEC space specifically, right? And the example I like to give all the time, and you can actually, if you go to the Document Crunch LinkedIn page, we have this amazing post that we did a little while ago where it was talking about asking the same questions in ChatGPT versus asking the same questions in Document Crunch's chat, which we're going to talk about here in a minute. And it shows just how much more refinement there is for understanding the built world space when you're asking a tool that is designed for the built world space, right? And not, again, just kind of this generalist thing. And what that means is you can get a lot more reliability when it comes to actually having outputs that are relevant to what it is you're doing. And the example we like to give is like jargon or acronyms, right? So, when we'll say like, hey, explain our LDs, right? In the chat, in ChatGPT, it has no idea what the acronym LDs mean. But of course, anybody on here is going to know that that means liquidated damages, right? So our chat will go in and be able to really start to spit out things that are relevant to your understanding of how the space works and what it is you need to know, even if it is layered in jargon, abbreviation, specific understandings. It is a very highly refined tool for anything in the construction space. Now, I'll say, this is why we don't go into something else. Like if we're in pharmaceutical and we have a pharmaceutical company coming in and trying to use this, it's not going to work for them, right? Because it's a totally different world, a totally different solution. We are focused on construction, and that means a better product and a better outcome for construction individuals.
Well said. Well said.
To that end, let's go to step 4 because we keep talking about the chat, and I want to talk about this because it's super important. One thing that we realize is even though we can give these playbooks to project teams and very specific guidance on how to execute a contract according to the language to be compliant, we know that there are also a lot of individual times where you're going to need an answer that is specific to a solution or specific to a situation that may not be in the playbook, but may be buried in context in the contract, right? So how do you extract those? How do you get what we call our just-in-time decision support? And this is really important, right? This is really, really important. So I mentioned like the weather delay notice. I love this example, right? Because what it allows project teams to do, what our chat does, is allows you to interface with the document and ask questions of it and get the answer back in real time and make it so that really complex things can be made very easy. So the chat is, again, if you've used something like ChatGPT, you're familiar with the interface, but the output is very different. The output in this case is looking for very specific things that are relevant to how you handle your contract and what in the language dictates your outcomes. So, again, explain to me how hazardous materials are, handled. Or maybe you could even say something about a specific situation. Say you have a product manager and there was an unforeseen site condition. Say you found like a septic tank, an old septic tank on a site that you're building, Okay, so you open up the chat within the document crunch interface. You say, how do I handle an unforeseen condition like a septic tank? Enter it. And it's going to go through, it's going to scan the entire document and be like, okay, so here's what you do. Here are all the steps that you need to take to remedy and add notice and blah, 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 blah. And it'll give you that very clear-cut instruction set for what to do around that very specific scenario and what to do in order to maintain compliance, right? And that's the whole name of the game here, because even if you have the best intentions, even if you feel like you may have the best relationship with your GC or you're a GC and you have the best relationship with your owner, don't rely on that because that's not spelled out in a legal contract. Do what the contract requires. That is the best way to CYA, to cover your ass, right?
Well, that's the whole point of it. I mean, if you're doing that first, you're not only just protecting the project, you're protecting yourself, your job, your reputation, and any spell out of ramifications that then allows you to have you're more clear-minded to go ahead and do the things that you have to do in a very intense job situation, which is, let's just call it, that's what construction is.
It is. And I think that a lot of times because of that intensity, a lot of the more mundane items get overshadowed by existing situational pieces, right? And let me explain what I mean by that. So like we talked about relying on your relationship with either the GC who hired you or the owner who hired you. If you're a GC, we have a good relationship with the owner. So like if we forget to issue this notice or something, maybe that's not a big deal, or maybe this this doesn't have to be handled this way because we've worked with them so much. That's all fine and well until money becomes something that's being discussed, right? And typically, and we've seen, everybody has these horror stories, right? Like everybody knows somebody who's gone through and had these relationships challenged when you go back to the contract because there's money on the line. And it's like, hey, we could have the best relationship, but when we're looking at, a $2 or $3 million discrepancy here in this project, and it wasn't handled the way that we legally agreed to, that means litigation, right? Like it doesn't matter how good your relationship is. There are worse and painful ways to solve it. And the best way to do this is to avoid it by maintaining compliance for the get-go in general. So I see that question there. Many contracts are also tied to project-specific specifications. Will your software also analyze the specs? Yes, we do have a solution for spec sheets. One of the great and terrible things about having big contracts and spec sheets is contract may say do it this way and your spec sheet may say do it another way, which is a very common scenario. So yes, we do have the ability to analyze spec sheets. I don't want to give too much away, but in the near future we'll actually have document comparison, so I'll give away that. So you'll be able to actually, compare certain documents against each other, which, if there are discrepancies between spec sheets and what is maybe required in your, say, prime contract, you'll have the ability to kind of point those out and say, hey, look, we're not going to sign this until we know there's parity in these two documents. And that's a really big deal because, again, the manual input for that takes a long time to do kind of that benchmarking back and forth between those. A great question, Renee. I appreciate that.
Great question. Thank you, Renee, as always, for your questions. And again, we encourage anybody else who's listening to, ask away, because we're winding around now to, I believe, which is going to be our fifth step in this discussion today, which is automated
compliance. So this is admittedly a current and future state step, because compliance is the automation of these things typically involves a lot of data, right? So I will point to our Procore integration. We have a very rich Procore integration. And these type of situations are interesting because when you can layer in the understanding of a contract and what needs to happen at certain milestones, or you need to remit certain notices for certain situation, when you can layer on those understanding of those requirements with systems of records that have the ability to provide that information like Procore, there's a future state of something that can be done to be automated. So this isn't available yet. So nobody take this and say, I'm going to go see a demo of this. But let me give you like an example of what could come down the pipeline, okay? So we talked about weather delay notifications, and we have a very, very in-depth integration with Procore. What happens when you have your contract in Procore, and we know that you need to issue a weather delay notice, X number of days before you anticipate a delay because of a really, really bad rainstorm? What happens when Procore has the weather data and everybody's information who you need to remit those notices to, and a compliance tool or a communication tool, right? So now you kind of start to see, hey, look, instead of a project manager needing to be the one to be aware of this, we are helping them currently make them aware of what is in the contract and what they need to do in order to stay compliant. But in the near future, it's going to be one step ahead of that, right? It's going to be saying, hey, Joe Bob, project manager here, we noticed that there's going to be a really intense rainstorm coming. And here's what we recommend for it. Here's your weather delay notice that we believe you're going to have to use, right? And so again, future state, but I want everybody to be aware of exactly what AI is going to be bringing to the table for a very, very powerful automation of work to be done. This isn't taking away anybody's jobs. Let's be very clear about that. AI is not something that is eliminating jobs. It just is not, right? At least in the construction space. What this is allowing people to do is be more proactive and stay compliant with the things that are very difficult to keep top of mind as you execute a project. And so I would encourage you, again, look at this ebook, take a look at these steps. We go into a lot more granular kind of use cases, and it just helps you understand a little bit more. And if not even for understanding document crunch, like just understanding like how AI can be applied in a way that is tangible. We want you to understand exactly how AI is going to impact construction technology and the way that you execute business projects and interface with your clients in the near future. So yeah, that's it for the ebook. I really hope this was a worthwhile discussion for everybody. Steph, as always, thank you for setting up these really great opportunities to have engaging discussions. It's a lot of fun.
It's a two-way street, right? It's like, how can we help? To me, the really great software, the ones that have really gone out and figured out something unique to solve in our industry, that, as I say, I'm going to go back to my comparison of a digital tool to a actual tool or machine on the site. At the end of the day, how can we make the project better for those that we can make it better for? And as you said at the top of this, you can't be everything to everybody. It just doesn't exist. And to me, the more precise you are about what you're fixing, then you know that you're providing a solution. The more broad brush that you are, you're trying to do everything end to end, you're everything to everybody. You are not everything to everybody. You can't be everything to everybody. Because, and the other thing is, then you're, in my opinion, this is just my opinion, you can be mediocre at what you're doing because of that.
Yep, I completely agree with that. And I think that that's going to become a lot more obvious from kind of a mass or maybe a critical mass perspective over the next few years as people start to realize that there are point solutions in the AI space that are really helpful for solving individual problems or areas that are causing a lot of hurt. This is a good time to get ahead of the learning curve. And honestly, things like this, I think, are really good opportunities for people to do just that. So thank you for having me, Steph, and thank you everybody on the call.
You're very welcome, Chad. I really appreciate it. And, you know, to our audience, we hope you enjoyed today's session. If you have questions about today's presentation, you can email us directly at info@intelops.com. And if other construction technology vendors out there would like to show off their construction technology, again, contact Intelligent Construction Opportunities at info@intelops.com. And with that, we're going to call it a wrap. Those that registered today, stand by, because I will be providing a link for you to be able to choose whether or not you would like to see a further demo by the Document Crunch team. And if there's any other questions at any time, just let us know. Thanks again, Chad.
Thank you, everyone.